Hi, I'm Blake Lively, and I'm going to be taking the BuzzFeed quiz, which iconic Blake Lively character?
From the outside, Blake Lively has always seemed like the golden face of Hollywood. Charming, camera perfect, and effortlessly in control of every room she walks into. But inside the studio walls, inside the departments that deal with budgets, schedules, approvals, and daily production chaos, another story had been simmering under the surface for years. A story that never quite made it to the press. Until now. It begins with whispers. Quiet conversations exchanged between exhausted crew members about the tension that followed Blake like a shadow. They weren't whispers of scandalous behavior in the usual Hollywood sense. They were whispers of demands. Sharp, specific, non-negotiable demands that slowly began reshaping entire sets, rewriting production days, and cornering directors into uncomfortable compromises. Her demands weren't small, trivial, or ego-boosting gestures. These were the kind of demands that carried weight, financial weight, management weight, morale weight. People who worked behind the scenes described it like a storm moving in without warning. At first, it was a small request here and there. Lighting adjustments that needed entire rigs moved during peak shooting hours, wardrobe changes approved only after they passed Blake's personal aesthetic threshold. Makeup artists replaced midday because the energy didn't feel right. Crew members would exchange glances, lower their heads, and quietly work through the extra load, hoping the day would end without another shift in expectations. But soon, the demands began to escalate. One insider recalls a moment during pre-production on a major project. Blake reportedly insisted that every scene involving her should be rewritten to focus more heavily on her character's internal strength. This wasn't framed as a suggestion. It was framed as a necessity, a creative requirement. The writer's room, already under insane pressure from studio deadlines, suddenly found themselves rewriting entire arcs to accommodate her request. A single storyline adjustment became several, and by the time production began, the writers had spent 2 additional weeks reshaping the script around Blake's new vision. The studio didn't fight it. They rarely did. Because Blake Lively wasn't just another actress. She was a brand, polished, recognizable, and front-page friendly. When someone with her public image makes a demand, executives don't slam the brakes. They quietly shift gears, smile at the press, and pretend everything is going according to plan. But beneath that perfect surface, the cracks were widening. Wardrobe staff members described something similar. Blake had always been known for her fashion influence, but when she took control of her wardrobe on set, it changed the dynamic drastically. She reportedly required full authority over every outfit, every fabric choice, every accessory, even when it clashed with the costume designer's planned aesthetic or the story's established tone. Entire costume budgets were reshuffled to satisfy last-minute design shifts. And when Blake wasn't fully satisfied with the stitching or silhouette, reshoots were ordered. Days of filming were lost simply to restyle and reframe shots that no longer fit her evolving look. Directors found themselves tiptoeing around her input. Some would adjust blocking, camera angles, and dialogue pacing solely to maintain harmony. Others tried to push back but quickly learned that pushing back came with consequences, disruption, delays, and the uncomfortable reality that Blake had more leverage than they did. But the real breaking point, the moment that shifted everything, came when new information surfaced about her behind-closed-doors production involvement. Blake wasn't just making requests. She was allegedly positioning herself as an unofficial producer, asserting influence over choices typically reserved for executives. Crew members claimed she would privately confront department heads, instructing them on how certain scenes should be shot or edited, bypassing the chain of command entirely. This wasn't standard actor input. This was territory that altered entire workflows. It created tension, silent, suffocating tension. Producers who had worked on sets for decades suddenly found themselves correcting issues they didn't approve, adjusting schedules they hadn't set, and covering costs they hadn't authorized. It wasn't chaotic in a loud or explosive way. It was quiet chaos, the kind that creeps through a workplace slowly until everyone feels it. Then came the moment when everything boiled over. According to several insiders, Blake made a private demand that shocked even the most seasoned crew members. She allegedly insisted that certain crew members be replaced entirely, because she felt their presence disrupted her focus. These weren't individuals who had behaved unprofessionally or broken protocols. These were skilled workers, some with decades of experience, who found themselves suddenly reassigned or removed from the project altogether. The reasoning? Blake's personal comfort on set. This wasn't the Hollywood diva stereotype. This was strategic, precise, almost meticulously calculated. She wanted a specific kind of environment, controlled and curated down to the smallest detail. And if someone didn't fit the vibe she envisioned, they were quietly replaced. This level of influence from an actor wasn't unheard of, but the extent of her control was. People began asking questions. Why? What was she trying to achieve? What was her intention? Some believed she was simply protecting her image, sculpting every corner of the production to match the persona she presented publicly. Others felt she was preparing for something bigger, perhaps a long-term shift into directing or producing, positioning herself as an unstoppable creative force. But the most unsettling theory was whispered by crew members who had seen enough to piece it together. Blake wasn't just protecting her career. She was controlling the narrative, shaping how every project depicted her, ensuring her roles aligned with the power she wanted to project. And if she needed to change scripts, budgets, or people to make that happen, she would. As this information quietly leaked into industry circles, the question grew louder. Was Blake Lively simply a perfectionist? Or was she someone who believed the entire production should orbit around her vision? The demands, the replacements, the script rewrites, all of it pointed to something bigger, something intentional. As the whispers surrounding Blake Lively's escalating control spread through production circles, the real story began slipping through the seams. A far deeper, more deliberate pattern that hinted at a calculated strategy unfolding behind the Hollywood glitter. What looked like random workplace demands slowly started forming a blueprint, a pattern too consistent to be coincidence. Every department touched by Blake's presence described the same thing. She wasn't simply reacting to her environment. She was reconstructing it, piece by piece, until the entire production ecosystem reflected her personal vision. It didn't start with conflict. It started with influence. A suggestion here, an adjustment there. But influence grew into insistence, and insistence grew into full-scale authority. Directors who originally believed Blake's involvement was collaborative soon realized they had stepped into a dynamic they could no longer control. One director recalls a moment when a key scene was ready to shoot. Sets prepared, lights positioned, extras on standby. When Blake asked for 5 more minutes, crew expected a wardrobe tweak or a hair adjustment. Instead, Blake walked directly to the monitor, examined the frame, and calmly said, "This angle doesn't respect my character's power." A simple statement, but it triggered a 45-minute delay as the cinematographer scrambled to adjust the lighting grid and reframe the scene. No discussion. No negotiation. The decision had been made for them. But the deeper they looked, the clearer it became. Blake wasn't demanding these changes for vanity alone. She was shaping control, sculpting a visual language in which she, and only she, held narrative dominance. Scenes were altered so she appeared stronger than written. Interactions were reframed so her character always held the emotional or intellectual leverage. Even in group shots, she allegedly insisted on blocking that visually placed her at the center, symbolically anchoring the scene around her presence. This wasn't traditional Hollywood ego. This was strategic authorship. The turning point came during what crew members described as the meeting that changed everything. Production had fallen behind schedule. The studio demanded answers. Instead of allowing the director or producer to speak, Blake reportedly stepped forward, as though she were the official voice of the project. Calm, composed, she delivered a speech outlining the creative misalignment she had seen on set and explained how she had been guiding the adjustments necessary to correct it. Executives were stunned. Crew members were speechless. If there had been any doubt before, it disappeared in that moment. Blake Lively believed she was the creative force driving the project. Not supporting it, not contributing to it, but leading it. Once that line was crossed, nothing returned to normal. Insiders noticed she began requesting private rehearsals with key actors, without the director present. She wanted to feel the energy directly, reshape the dialogue pacing, adjust emotional beats, and sometimes reassign blocking. Some actors pushed back. Some complied. But everyone knew that resisting her preferences came with consequences. Won't be invited into promotional events, reduced screen time during press cuts, or simply being labeled as difficult in rooms where careers could be quietly ended. Then came the editing involvement the one-line actors almost never cross. Post-production is sacred territory, guarded by editors, directors, and studio oversight. But Blake reportedly gained access to preliminary cuts, offering notes not just on her performance, but on scene order, pacing, musical cues, and even character arcs unrelated to her own. When editors declined to implement her suggestions due to studio guidelines, they found themselves unexpectedly reassigned or replaced. This wasn't coincidence. This was a pattern. The new, explosive information that surfaced next pushed the industry chatter into overdrive. According to multiple individuals involved in the production, Blake had been quietly documenting every friction point, every disagreement, every delay, compiling her own version of production logs. These notes, detailed and sharply worded, seemed crafted not for internal improvement but for leverage. Leverage for what? That became clearer when insiders realized Blake was positioning herself for an upcoming move. She wanted to step into producing roles officially, and not in a symbolic celebrity producer way. She wanted real power, creative power, managerial power, decision-making power. Her demands were not impulsive. They were rehearsals for authority. Every time she overrode a lighting decision, it was practice. Every time she rewrote dialogue, it was groundwork. Every time she replaced a crew member, it was a test: who would comply, who would resist, and who could be shaped into her orbit. But some believed something even deeper was at play. A theory began circulating among the higher-level crew members. A theory that connected everything. Blake Lively wasn't just shaping productions. She was shaping her legacy. She had watched the Hollywood machine for years. She had seen how actresses were sidelined, typecast, and replaced as they aged. She had seen how women were often denied long-term creative influence, left clinging to relevance through sequels, social media presence, or carefully curated brand partnerships. But Blake didn't want relevance. She wanted control. Every demand wasn't about ego. It was about future-proofing. She wanted a career that didn't depend on casting directors or male-driven studio hierarchies. She wanted to become one of those names, seldom questioned, always respected, who could walk onto any set and reshape the narrative because she had earned that position. The only problem was, she hadn't earned it yet, so she created it. Piece by piece, she built an informal authority structure around herself. She influenced scripts the way producers do. She commanded scenes the way directors do. She assessed performances the way casting leads do. And as more people adjusted to this unofficial hierarchy, her influence became quietly institutionalized. But ambition always leaves cracks. When the final weeks of production arrived, certain crew members decided they had seen enough. They began documenting their own experiences, detailed accounts of delays, tensions, and decision overrides. What started as private frustration slowly became a collective effort to protect themselves from being blamed for production issues that were never theirs to begin with. Their records told a different story than Blake's polished documentation. Where Blake framed herself as the guiding force correcting a chaotic production, crew logs showed consistent interference that created chaos where none existed. Scenes rewritten without approval. Crew removed without cause. Budgets reshuffled without permission. Entire production days derailed by aesthetic-driven demands. The studio eventually received both sets of documentation, Blake's and the crew's, and the contrast was so sharp, so unmistakably contradictory, that internal questions finally surfaced. What was Blake Lively really trying to achieve? And how far was she willing to go for it? Some executives defended her, claiming she possessed exceptional creative instincts, and merely lacked the proper title to express them. Others argued that she had overstepped so drastically that giving her official authority would only deepen the fractures. But the truth, the uncomfortable truth hanging in the air, was this: Blake had already shown them exactly who she would be as a producer. A visionary to her supporters, a tyrant to her critics. And the industry realized something chilling. Blake Lively wasn't auditioning for power. She was claiming it. Not tomorrow. Not in a future project. But here, now, inside a production she believed she could transform into her personal proving ground. Her intention, once clouded by speculation, became painfully clear. She wasn't trying to improve the project. She was trying to own the narrative both on screen and behind the camera. And as her influence grew, so did the silent fear. If this was what she could do without an official title, what would she become if the industry finally gave her one?